that's an idea. Now that's an idea. Now that's an idea. Now that's an idea. So thank you to yourself, Sheridan, for coming on the show, and everyone for signing up, listening, and clicking the likes and all that. And today we are here with Heritage Tairāwhiti. What's your actual title there? How are you involved with Heritage Tairāwhiti?
I am currently vice chair, and I've been a committee member for about 25 years.
So it's a heritage organisation in itself. So maybe can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Because I know you're a historian, a ex-journalist, a kind of communications person. Who are you? Because I know you as this kind of old family friend, but actually you've got a whole complex life. Are you from Tairāwhiti?
No, I'm actually from Auckland.
Oh.
I came to the East Coast from Devonport, where I grew up, and went to Tolaga Bay to live in 1975. Lived there for 3.5 years and then moved up to Pōtaka and lived there for 7.5 years without electricity and young children.
Really?
I had the children without the electricity, yeah. And
When-
then I
when-
went to
Oh, I was thinking about this electricity. This is fascinating. How did you do your washing and stuff?
You had an old copper and to do with fire under the copper to do the washing. And then my father, one day he worked in Dominion Road and he came across this old, it was kind of like an agitator, a copper cone, a double copper cone on a stick, which was like the original agitator. So you just plunged it up and down and it agitated the clothes. So I did that inside the copper and it was revolutionary. It made such a difference to the washing.
Well, and you wouldn't be complaining about power bills like we do today.
No, not at all.
Just sore arms.
We're just talking about that to Ju today, talking about how that time that we both spent up the coast without the niceties of life, how it built resilience and resourcefulness.
Yeah.
And yeah, so a lot of learning. Then I went to Opotiki, and that's where I actually got a job at the Opotiki News. So it was like, what am I going to do with my life? Well, managed to get a job as a reporter at the Opotiki News. And then I knew some people who worked at the Gisborne Herald, and they said, oh, there's a job going. So I came over here and managed to get a job as a sub-editor. Not that I knew what a sub-editor was. Managed to get a job and then went back reporting. So I was there for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And funnily enough, and then I left, and the first job out of the Herald, I left because I was offered the chance to write a history of the Poverty Bay Electric Power Board and Eastland Energy. So it's kind of ironic that I lived without electricity, but kind of my first book that I wrote was about the coming of electricity to the region.
And then down the track, you wrote A Splendid Isolation.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
It came about because, well, by that stage I'd set up my own business and had written a few other books for what was then Historic Places Tairāwhiti. I'd written a few books for them, and it was actually a chance meeting with Coralie Campbell Whitehead, who was a librarian at the public library here. She's since retired. But she said, oh, J.A. Mackay's book, which is, I can just lean over and get it, this very ratty looking copy, J.A. Mackay's History of Poverty Bay and East Coast. It went from early times through to about 1949, and Coralie said, well, it'd be really good to have a book that went from the end of Mackay's Bible to the modern time. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And I had a bit of a lull in business at the time, and I thought, oh yeah, well, I could give that a go. And yeah, so that's how that came about.
Because I think A Splendid Isolation is one of those few kind of coffee table books that is actually like wonderfully useful. Like when you can flick through it and actually take a lot from it. You know, in like a lot of coffee books, you just like nice pictures of a cabin somewhere in the woods, and you're just like, well, it's useless. But this is actually that's fascinating, and because it's got pictures as well.
Yeah,
It's like it's accessible and interesting, and especially if you live on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and who else was involved in that book? 'Cause that's a mammoth undertaking.
Massive book. I had help from some small sections. Chris Tyler did a lot of the sport, most of the sport, which was really good. And John Jones, who was the chief reporter at the Gisborne Herald, he helped with a few sections too.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and I actually need to get a copy of that book because we've got one in Gisborne, but we don't have one here in Auckland, and I need it. And then so you've got this wonderful background of writing about electricity from a non-electricity background. But how did you get involved with Heritage Tairāwhiti, and how did this organisation start?
Well, the organisation dates back, I don't actually know the exact date, but I think it's back in the 50s, 1950s, and it was a branch committee of Heritage New Zealand. So it was, or Historic Places New Zealand. And so this branch was called Historic Places Gisborne at, earlier in the time, and it had a committee, committees over all those decades, and they did lots of useful things and kind of similar to what we do now, really. And then gradually it became Historic Places Tairāwhiti. I joined in about 2000. Sheila Robinson, who was the chair and a historian at the museum, they got me to write a book about, it's called Historic Journeys. So it's driving tours from Gisborne round the coast and also down to Wairoa and back the other way, right round to Tuapuruki and back to Gisborne. So that little book conjunct for the actual committee I wrote. And then Sheila said, well, you better come on the committee. So that was kind of how it started. Yeah.
And so I'd love to know your kind of thoughts on why Heritage Tairāwhiti is actually important. Is it about maintaining older buildings or older stories? Yeah, like I mean, I guess we could start by why did you get involved in the first place, or why did you think it was important?
Why did I get involved?
Why is
Why is
heritage
anybody?
important?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's our catch cry more today is telling stories about people and place. So we're not so much about the buildings, it's about the people behind the buildings, or, of course, the buildings are important, telling about the style of architecture or, just the way things change. But for me, I think it's more about the people who inhabited those buildings and how they used the buildings and what society was like at the time. And yeah, so it's what we do now is we do a lot about, I just look at my brochure, like we advocate and we educate and provide heritage experiences. Yeah, I think we're more about experiences and getting people to join. They're most interested in tours and events and learning about our history and our heritage. Yeah, it's not always the things that we can see today, but what we can't see anymore.
Yeah, there's actually so much in the region that is just kind of buried over time. Like down Shelley Road at my dad's house, and like in the stream, we find these old bricks, and there's no buildings around, and there's no kind of evidence of people were there. But it's actually so much has happened over time that the history's kind of gone, and we'll probably never know.
Right.
But that's the same with I don't know, a lot of Tairāwhiti, I guess. It's kind of disappearing.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess that's part of why we want to keep telling the stories and remembering what has been there. And then that makes me intrigued as to think, oh, I wonder if there was a brickworks there, or did somebody use those bricks for a path at one time that had a dwelling there? Yeah.
So how do you choose which stories to tell? Because there's obviously very different narratives about the occupation of Tairāwhiti. How do you what makes like a compelling story to you that you want to tell and you think people will want to hear?
Well, I guess we like to have a range, a diverse kind of group of things that we do during the year and kind of spread it out. We might go to a marae to hear stories from a marae and the people who inhabit that. And then we might do something like about industry, or one of the things we've been doing this past year is running tours of the Taruheru River. And I think you're going to come one day. And so it's talking about the river, for instance, which is this river that goes right through our city, but also talking about the people that inhabited that river. Well, from what we know, of course, it was inhabited by Maori from early times and used as a highway to go from the coast to inland, and also a place to live and to grow, and full of resources. But also then with the coming of European, all the different players along the river, like John Harris, who was the first European trader to actually settle here and marry into local people, and people like Captain Reed, Thomas Halbert, Robert Espy, and all these people had stories about, we tell stories about them because they're fascinating, and they encouraged the development of what became Gisborne.
Mm.
And people like William King, who had a flour mill, and he felled timber up Macquarie Way, and then brought all the timber down the river. And so, I mean, all these stories are compelling. I mean, you can talk about the buildings, but it's the people. They're not there anymore, but these stories are just so rich, and it kind of helps bring to life, the area and how it's been used and how it's changed. And so we just kind of try and get a good mixture of events that tell different stories, and we always try and bring in a mana whenua component, so that we're trying to tell both sides of the stories, that what's happened, and reminding people about what happened before, and the loss of land, loss of so much for the people from here, to try and improve understanding between the people who live here today as to what's happened before.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's very much about a sharing of, and sharing stories with the hope that we help people understand where we've come from.
Yeah, and on the Taruheru, are there any stories that you find extremely compelling, like photographers or the abattoir? Or one of my favorite kind of tidbits is just this kind of boats that used to go up would have chimneys that would detach down,
Yeah.
so they could go under the bridges, which you just don't kind of see the river that way anymore.
No.
What's your favorite kind of stories of the Taruheru?
Well, there's a few funny ones, but John Harris, I mean, he became an alcoholic and committed suicide. So, but he started off as this young trader, 23 years old, came to this area from Australia, England, via Australia, and married into Maori family. Tukura was his wife. I mean, there's so many stories. Like, he had two sons and sent the first one away to Sydney. His mother was just bereft because her child was sent away at the age of 4 or something for about 7 or 8 years. I mean, she probably died of a broken heart. I think she also got sick, but the whole thing of having her son sent away was tragic. Yeah, so I mean, that's just part of the story. And Thomas Halbert, who had 6 wives, and he had an untimely death because he was upriver with a couple of mates, and there was a schooner, and they had cases of wine that was due to go to Tolaga Bay. Anyway, they got into the wine and drank it all, and then they were going back to their own boat along the Tarahiru. I'm not quite sure exactly where, but up towards Makaraka, because schooners could sail all the way up there at that time. Anyway, they got stuck in the mud, and they got out to try and push the boat out, and their feet just went further and further into the mud. And one guy got out, but Halbert and the other guy, they got stuck in the mud and they drowned. It's like, and yet he's the father and of so many children and descendants today. But it just seems like a tragic story. And Robert Espy, who had 3 wives, and the third one, I mean, he was the one who bought land at the confluence with the Tarahiru and the Waimata at that confluence area. There's a little plaque that a previous committee put there in the walkway. Robert Espy was a whaler up Tokomaru Bay, but with his third wife, when he was back down this way, she ran off with a captain of a schooner that was berthed in the Tarahiru, and Espy came after him and said, if I find her on your boat, I'm going to kill you. And the captain had hid the woman in a big barrel on board, and Espy didn't find them, but they sailed away on the next tide, never to be seen again. So it's like, wow, it's so full of life that's happened.
So it's a very like Treasure Island kind of tomfoolery, just kind of young sailors who are just up to no good, getting drunk and hiding in
Yeah,
barrels.
yeah, it was a totally different time.
It was 6 wives. One yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, that was different times. Yeah, but you asked about different things that we're involved with. Well, we've been running a quiz night, the Great Gisborne History Quiz, for the last 4 years, and that's a popular way of kind of telling people a bit about history without it being too onerous. So that's a good thing we've been doing the last few years. And we've had this Tarahiru photo exhibition at our building. We've had our building open over the last like December through to March, and we'll probably do that again this year with our little loyal band of volunteers and running tours. And we're about to put up a new exhibition of photos about the AMP show, because it's just celebrating 150 years this year. And I've just finished writing a book about that. And so we're going to use some of the fantastic number of photos. So I'm just using some of those photos as part of a new exhibition. And then we're running a photographic competition, plug, which is running at the moment. We're trying to get, because William Crawford, who was our first mayor and also first brewer, well, second brewer, but he had, like the major brewery at the end of Low Street. He was such a fantastic photographer and chronicler for our development. And we realised that we need to keep taking photos of life today. And we thought we'd focus on the rivers, because the river goes right past our building, Tarahiru. And so we thought we'd use the rivers of Tairāwhiti as our focus. So we're encouraging people to take photos and enter this competition, which has good prize money. And then in early December, we'll have a new exhibition of the prize winners and have a bit of a do for that. So that's what's coming up. And
I'm just thinking, you might be able to answer this question for me, because I've always wondered, along our rivers, speaking of our rivers, they used to be the kind of focus point of the city, where like it seemed like a lot of activity happened along the river, and then like there was buildings there, and like boats would come up and park alongside the main city center side. But then it seems like over time it's just like moved away. Like there's no cafe on the river, which like is just
crazy.
seems criminal. Do you know why that kind of transition happened? Or
Well,
can you guess?
what happened, I mean, the Turanganui River was that was the first port. And so everything happened around that area. And so buildings developed. The whole city faced Turanganui River, because that was where everything was. The hotels, the shipping companies, all the major buildings and businesses were all in that custom house. And
It's like around like around Usco and
yeah,
PVC and stuff like
all
that.
that way. So that was all the start of it. And then it gradually, as Gisborne grew, it grew further and further and faced away from the river. Whereas to begin with, it was all facing the river. And the same with the Tarahiru. There was right on the confluence, George Reed had his store, the iron store, which was the big trading spot. And so there were boats up there too, all the way along.
Is that like where the rotunda is?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just the development of Gisborne. And I always think now, wouldn't it be good if we just compressed all the business back towards the harbour, went back down there so you didn't have any empty shops. You could just compress all the business, so it would be all.
But where did all those buildings go? Because I've seen photos where there was buildings like on the waterfront almost.
Well, lots
so
of
those
them
burned down.
Just demolished, all the watties, and I mean, different businesses were not necessarily good for the river either. Oh, there's a lot of waste that went into it. And the
Yeah.
freezing works, that was
Pump
real,
it out to ocean.
very, very industry heavy for a long time, but that's changed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Not some changes for the better.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. You becoming a historian because you went from writing journalism, which is called the first draft of history, to actually kind of writing the final copy. How's that transition for you?
Well, I think, yeah, it's quite interesting because sometimes journalists come along and help with different things, and it's quite a different thing because you've got to be so correct. You can't be just a bit loose with facts. You've really got to say where you got that information from and reference everything to make it a good reference book. It's got to be as true as possible, or correct as possible. Yeah, you can't. Yeah. Not that we try to be loose as journalists, but sometimes that does happen. It's like, well, where did you actually get that information? Or you've actually said 1923 here, but later in the story you've said 1925. So which one's right? So there's things like that happen. So I'm a bit of a pedant for facts, which makes me rather annoying to live with.
Well, I mean, facts are tricky things in themselves because I've been on Ancestry.com, whatever, doing family history, and official documents often have different dates or like different birthdays or different spellings of names.
Yeah.
And so finding out, hammering down to what actually happened, especially with the passage of time, can be slippery at best.
Yeah. No, it can.
And so what's now the kind of long-term vision you've got, or the organisation has got for Heritage Tairāwhiti?
Well, we inhabit the former Plunkett building, and the idea is that that's where we kind of start and finish tours, where we hold talks. We've had a lot of talks this year and show and tell type things about heritage, various topics. But you kind of want it to be a centre where people know this is where you can go to find things out about, whether it's about a building or people might come and say, trying to find something out about our house, or what colours should we paint it, or what would be the right colour to be painting this house, or anything to do with our heritage, really, just to be like a one-stop shop. But it all depends on volunteers, so we just kind of keep going. But we have good relationships with Tarawhiti Museum and East Coast Museum of Technology. Yeah, so it's kind of all those different bodies and just trying to work together and point people in those directions as well. We're not the only ones. Somebody popped into our building the other day and wanted to know about a particular person at a different time. And I didn't have that information, but I could point them to the museum just across the roads, that type of thing where you're just building relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
But
so
that's kind of our long-term vision, is just to keep telling stories. I mean, we've got about 120 or 30 members. I mean, mainly what they like is to be going on trips or hearing about our heritage. So we've got to keep feeding them, keep the members.
well,
There's a
this
lot
is
to
so
do.
you've just got a basically the same as this. You've got a podcast, but it's in person.
Interviewing people.
Oh, like making content.
Yeah. Yeah.
People need new content
Yeah.
constantly.
Constantly. Yeah. But yeah, so we've got another walk coming up at the end of November, which is focusing on the architecture and the people in the Fitzherbert Clifford Street area, which includes people like the Muir family, who built what became what is now called Cedar House. And that was a girls' school at one time called St. Winifred's. That was a school for quite a while. And yeah, different people who have lived in that area, some lovely architecture. And yeah, so that'll be something that's coming up.
So what date's that? November oh, yeah, cool. We'll make sure to get that out to the people. And what's so good about these a lot of these walks and tours and things is it's not like some random person in London or New York or something that you have no connection to. It's like often you're like the Muirs, you're like, oh yeah, I used to work for the Muirs.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
kind of like real living connection
yeah,
through almost all these stories.
Yeah. Well, we often have people on our tours, like one of our members is descended from Robert Espy the whaler. They can kind of say, well, here's da 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 who descends from there, and there's such and such who descends from Thomas Halbert. Or
Bad news, but your great 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 grandfather died drunk in the river. It's an unforgettable way to go, anyway.
I know
Give
it's
him that.
tragic.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us on Now That's an Idea.
Thank you, Jack.
Now that's an idea.